So I asked you to review involving stocks and flows, and you should have seen many of these slides in that video. So I'd like to have a bit of a dialogue with you now about stocks and flows. So tell me about the role stocks and flows play. What is a stock? What does a stock represent? Accumulation. Yeah. So it's accumulation. It's accumulation of some quantity. And in many ways it captures the state of a system. The current status of that situation. The current situation of the system is entirely summarized, ladies and gentlemen, in the stocks. The stocks serve as the memory for that system. And they lead to phenomena where that memory matters because, for example, it leads the system to be in disequilibrium. Stocks are distinguished because they can be measured at a single point in time. We can imagine freezing the system, a single point in time, and measuring the values of stocks. We could count the number of patients that are in an emergency room and the number of patients in each ward of the hospital at a given moment of time. Freeze that system, go count, and that would be related to stocks. You get a stock for the number of patients in emergency room, stock number of patients in the critical care unit, stock for the number of patients in the rehab area, or what have you. And those would be different stocks. Or you could freeze up a financial system and count the amount of money in different bank accounts. The amount of money in a vault or whatever. So we typically can measure them at an instant in time. And stocks are distinguished by the fact that they start with some initial value. We need to specify that. But after that, their dynamics are dictated purely by the flows. Flow in, flow out. So if the flow in is greater than the flow out, what's going to be going on with that stock? Yeah, it'll be rising. The value of it will be rising. Think about a bathtub where there's water flowing in faster than it's leaving. The bathtub's going to be rising. It's level, right? Rising up. And you think about a situation of the outflows, one or more of them, exceed the values of the inflows, one or more of them, and the value is going to be falling, right? So their behavior over time, you have to specify an initial value, but after that, their behavior is dictated by the value of the flows. You typically don't have to specify per se a formula for the stock. It's just the integral over time of flows in, flows out, flows in minus flows out. Integrates it up, totals it up over time. Okay. And in a diagram, these are shown as rectangles, and I think we have a diagram here. So here, number of susceptible people, number of infected people, number of temporarily immune, and number of cumulative illnesses. These are all stocks. Okay. Now, by contrast, well, okay, and I did note that stocks play a key role because they do provide the memory. They provide the basis for build-up and accumulation, and for hysteresis, where it kind of remembers the state that it was in previously. And they lead to inertia. Inertia because it takes a while to change their values over time. And therefore, they're typically associated with delays. There's some delay in time needed to sort of nudge it in the appropriate way. Okay, so we might have stocks associated with our beliefs, and those beliefs take time to change. We have sort of patterns of observation that have been built up, and over time they may be shifted. So if we believe it's 9 p.m. at night, so it should be quite quick to go in a car downtown. We may maintain that belief for a while, but over time, as we see more and more cars lined up, as we go towards the bridge or what have you, that belief will start to shift. These are associated with state and memory. Yes?
Can you explain how stock is leading to inertia?
Yes. So how do stocks change? How does a stock change over time?
Slow.
Flow, right? And at the same time, what is it that drives the value of flows? What is it that dictates the value of those flows? What do those flows typically depend on?
Either the stock value or some sort of science behind
Yeah.
the underlying flow.
Okay, yeah, often they depend on the state of the system at some level. For example, how many people are recovering, from some illness? Depends how many people have it, right? And so it depends some on that state of the system. The number of the rate at which cars are going through a bridge depends on how many cars are currently on that bridge, etc. So often we have a value of a flow that depends critically on the value of one or more stocks. And it may depend on it may depend on other stocks as well. We'll see some models where that's critical. For example, how much word of mouth there is about your organization, how many sales that leads to, if you're in business, selling a product, depends on not only the number of people who are currently interested in buying something, but the number of people who already have the product, because you may get word of mouth sales, for example. So you may have multiple stocks influencing valuable flow. And because these stocks determine the values of flows in the model, when we ask about behavior of the model changing over time, we're often focused on, okay, what are the flows doing over time? Because it's the flows that dictate the values of the stocks, okay?
Yeah.
And for the stocks for the flows to change, the values of those stocks need to change, okay? Because the flows are dependent on those stocks. If a stock has a very, very large value, it takes time to drain that value out. It takes time to sort of lower the value. So there may be some, for example, strong perception of risk associated with something, and it takes time to adjust it. There may be a inertia, and so that's an example of inertia. Another example of inertia is you have a situation where this is a case for a student who just graduated. She was looking at the population of people. So she was modeling a system where people have diabetes, okay, and they develop over time something called end-stage renal disease, which is where their kidneys fail. And this is typically a condition associated with end of life for a variety of reasons. People tend to die from here. These are not reversible conditions under normal circumstances. And so she was looking at this situation where you have the general population. You can view these as normal glycemic, so in other words, people with solid blood sugar levels, and they become diabetic in the ESRD. You have the ESRD patients. Now, what she said is, what if we were to eliminate occurrence of diabetes? This is like the dream of modern medicine. If we could eliminate diabetes, we could stop diabetes from being a problem, that would be just an absolutely huge advance. It would dwarf contributions made on, with respect to progress in treating many other communicable illnesses, for example. So if we could eliminate diabetes, how would that affect things? And what she found is that you would, believe it or not, in terms of actual costs, the costs if in the sort of normal case, the case that we expect to happen, will be accumulating faster and faster, okay? And this is over something like a 30-year time frame. Mm-hmm. If you were to eliminate diabetes, if you were to X this out, this flow, because of how many people already have it, the costs associated with this system, and particularly with treatment here, will actually continue to rise for quite some time, and only slowly sort of diverge from this, and only turn around maybe 25 years from now. So we have a situation where there's tremendous inertia in the sense that you think you're going to solve a problem. We solve diabetes, and therefore we're going to eliminate costs from diabetes. Okay, we're going to eliminate that major cost to our product, which is billions of dollars. And it turns out Yes, but it takes a long time. That's the inertia. It takes decades because it takes a long time to drain the stock of existing diabetics. This stock maintains the inertia. It's this memory that is going to take some time to change. And therefore, because the stocks dictate the flows, until you substantively change the value of the stock, you can stop all sorts of flows, but until you change the value of the stock, the system's going to behave. Remember, stocks determine flows. The system's going to behave perhaps quite similar to how it did previously until the values of the stocks are drained down. Until those
So are you
values
trying
of the
to
stocks
say,
change.
the
Yeah.
value of the stock
Yeah.
may need some time to change.
Yes.
So that is leading to inertia.
Correct. But it's not simply that. It's often what we change, what we can change in things is not the values of stocks. What we can change is flows.
Yeah.
We can stop a flow from occurring.
Yeah.
And we may expect instant results from that, and often we're bitterly disappointed because the stocks are the memory of the system. For it to change, it's like trying to slow down an oil tanker. You have this big oil tanker, and you try to stop it, and it takes 3 kilometers to stop, to turn around. And it's because of these stocks we can change the flows. That's often what we can affect more readily is the flows. And we may expect instant results from that, but in fact, because the values of stocks don't change instantly, there's continued sort of behavior of the system in a way that we thought would change for quite some time until those flows change. Does that make sense? Okay, so the key point here is with respect to inertia, stocks have memory. Stocks have they're the state of the system. Unless we change the state of the system, the behavior of the system will typically be the same. And typically we don't have the luxury of directly changing that stock. What we can affect is the flows into and out of that stock. We can't directly, instantly change the stock. What we can do, if we have money in our bank account, we want to have more money, we affect the inflow. We deposit something into there. Right? If we want to reduce the number of patients in an emergency room, we make beds available elsewhere in the hospital so that they can flow over to those. So what we affect is typically flows. And those flows take a while to affect the stock. Okay? They typically require time to affect that stock. And until that point, such a point where that stock's value has changed significantly, we're going to be seeing similar behavior out of the system.
Yeah.
Okay? And I have some slides later. This is a wonderful question. I just want to tie it in. This is one of the luxuries we have, since I know you folks have looked at this before. So if we have this stock and we have this flow into the stock, if we have this flow into the stock in a way that's kind of default way here, you'll notice that we have a flow in and no flow out, right? The flow in is 10, say it's liters per minute into the stock. There's no flow out. And so what's the stock going to do? It's going to rise linearly. Now, suppose that we lower this flow dramatically partway into this, say at time 50. We dramatically lower the flow by a factor of 2. You might think there's an instant change here. Wow, we're making a huge difference. We're shutting down the water. Well, the answer is it makes some difference, but the difference only becomes manifest over time. We lowered the value of this flow dramatically by a factor of 2. But in terms of the value of the stock, which is going to be determining other things in the system typically, we see a difference that's initially infinitesimal, and over time that grows. So we do see from this dramatic change in flow, which is often, again, the thing we can affect in life, we see a change in the state of the system, but it's a change that has to accumulate over time. It has to build up over time. And this is one aspect by what I mean as inertia. It takes time to sort of change the system for what it otherwise would have been. I'll give another example. You may think this is in some way prosaic, obvious, but people make these reasoning mistakes all the time. We are not very good about reasoning about stocks and flows. And one example concerns the issue of emissions and global warming. So there's a lot of concern, and rightly so, about emissions levels. Emissions levels currently of greenhouse gases exceed those for millions of years that have been observed, and are leading to concentrations of gases in the atmosphere that exceed those seen for millions of years. So it's nudging upward from 280, I think, to high 300s now. And really what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with an imbalance. If we draw out here CO2 in the atmosphere, what are the things flowing into this? Well, there's actually several types of things flowing in. Give me one of them. Okay, so transportation related CO2. So, we'll say car emissions, right? There's some others. So, things from flatulence of cows. There's from others. Factories. There's things from natural events, things like volcanoes, etc., and from a variety of other sources, including people breathing, right? So rotting vegetation is a big one. So sort of decay of forests and so on. Now, what are the flows out of CO2 in the atmosphere? Yeah, by and large, it's sort of plant photosynthesis that is responsible for observing a lot of CO2. Now, CO2 capture, another one, carbon storage, CCS technologies, carbon capture and storage. So that would be another one that's being experimented with. And there's other ones that have been proposed, seeding the ocean with iron particles and all those sort of things, geoengineering, etc. But plant photosynthesis is the dominant one, by and large. I mean, it's, overwhelming. Okay, so there's a lot of attention, understandably, in carbon emissions, particularly in the things we can control, factories and car transportation related, right? Emissions. And rightly so. Those are the things we can control most directly. That's something we could focus on. But there's talks about dramatically lowering emissions, or lowering them by 10%, lowering by 20%. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here talking about flows. We're talking about flows into this system. And if we had a grand success on the CO2, negotiation front, if the successors to Rio and Copenhagen, et cetera, had a grand breakthrough where we were able to negotiate dramatic worldwide emissions lowering, will it have an impact on CO2? Eventually. But what you're going to see is a buildup. What's been going on is this buildup in CO2. And you may see a dramatic lowering here, just like we did, right? Dramatic lowering. And you're going to see the CO2 start to diverge. Now, how far it diverges, well, it depends a lot on how far different these are. But the point is, it's going to take time to build up. It's going to take time to lower this to the levels that it had, in the 1900s. And during that time, we can expect a lot of continuing to live with a lot of adverse consequences. A lot of stronger hurricanes, or a lot of stronger droughts, and extremes in terms of precipitation for a good long time. Even if we dramatically affect these inflows, there's going to be continued presence of a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide. And even if it heads downward in the most extreme case, even if we cut it so that these emissions are below the levels which it's absorbed, we're going to see, a decrease, but it will be a decrease that will take place slowly. And maybe, here's the pre-industrial levels down here. And it may take 100 years to get down to that level, even with a world-shaking type breakthrough in the emissions. So this is an example of a case of a situation where we have flows and we have stocks, and all the analysis that you'll commonly see, or the large majority of the commentary analysis is on the emissions, the flows. But it obscures the point often that even if we change those flows extremely dramatically, we'll still have to be living with and dealing with higher CO2 levels. And it makes, in a way, the consequences even more dramatic. It's not just we can deal with we have to think, okay, if we have this level of flow, what's the temperature going to be? The answer is, we may have higher temperatures for a while until we drain that stock of CO2. Does that make sense? So that's an example of inertia. We will see other cases where our reasoning is often quite faulty with this, but this is one case where we have inertia. Okay, inertia associated with it, and in this case of global CO2, often we're probably going to be talking about inertia the last decades of having to live with this